paper reports that two of the male prostitutes were given a late-night tour of the White House last year.
I think I'm entitled.
You want answers!
I want the truth!
You can't handle the truth!
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Nick Bryant podcast. 3 weeks ago, I asked my Patreons to send me questions, and I was open to all questions except for those that concern my personal hygiene. And I fielded a number of great questions. The first question is from Spencer, and he said, what is Larry King up to today? Larry King, or Lawrence E. King, was one of the pedophiles in the book I wrote called The Franklin Scandal. And Larry did some time in federal prison, and he got out, and he had a no-show job waiting for him at a BMW dealership in Virginia. And today, Larry is residing in Reston, Virginia. And he's tried to ingratiate himself to a number of organizations that will give him access to children. He initially tried Granville Academy. And I looked into Granville Academy, and it took lower socioeconomic kids on field trips. It wasn't even a school. And I thought that that was a very bad idea. So I inundated Granville Academy with phone calls, and I had some friends inundate Granville Academy with phone calls. And Larry King was ultimately expunged from Granville Academy. And then he showed up at the Washington Redskins event committee, and I quickly got him booted out of there. And then he showed up at Opera Nova, which provides lower socioeconomic children with singing lessons. And I thought that that was also a very bad idea. So I got him kicked out of Opera Nova. Now he is with Heritage Fellowship Church. And I've called up Heritage Fellowship Church a number of times, and he's still there. And I have yet to start a campaign to get him booted out of there. But in case anyone's interested, the number for Heritage Church in Reston, Virginia is 703-620-9515. 703-620-9515. And then someone commented that he was managing a Red Lion in Leesburg, Virginia, and continues to live in Reston. That part of him living in Reston is true, but he doesn't manage a food line in Leesburg, Virginia. And Zach asked about the UK pedophile scandal. And yes, it is very similar to Franklin. You had the upper echelon abusing children, and then you had a massive cover-up. On my blog, I've got an article called Pedophiles and Prime Ministers, where I look at the British scandal. And I think that it went all the way up to the top. Ted Heath, the Prime Minister of the UK, was implicated. And there was an organization called the Pedophile Information Exchange, or PI, and it was run by Sir Peter Heyman. And according to The Guardian, he was the number 3 man in MI6. So again, with Epstein and Franklin, we have intelligence. And then also with the pedophile scandal in the 1980s in the UK, we also have intelligence. And then I was asked by Joe about Jimmy Savile and if there's any good books about them. Now, there's been a number of books that have been written about Jimmy Savile. I haven't read any of them, so I'm not in really a position to comment on them. But I kind of believe that Jimmy Savile was a smokescreen because there was so many other things going on. Jimmy Savile was kind of like a lightning rod for all these allegations, when actually you've got people very high in intelligence and possibly a prime minister who are involved. So I kind of, that's my view. And most of the news about that pedophile network was about that at least across the pond was about Jimmy Savile. Now, John and Logan asked me about Pizzagate, and I do agree that there's a lot of high weirdness with Pizzagate. $20,000 worth of hot dogs, and I dug into Pizzagate. I really did, and I tried to get some information, and I finally got to a guy who I felt could really offer me solid information on Pizzagate, and ultimately he could not. And I disengaged from it at that point. I support myself as a writer, and I can go off on investigations, but investigations are expensive. And at that point, I just didn't have the money required to spend more time on Pizzagate. But I approach everything agnostically. That's my credo, is I try to approach everything agnostically. So I haven't written off Pizzagate, but then I haven't found any corroboration for it. So with Pizzagate, I'm pretty much at the same place that I started. Although I will say that there's some very strange and weird things going on there. I can't really explain them. There was Ben Swan of the CBS affiliate in Atlanta did a segment on Pizzagate, where he looked at all the anomalies, and he came up with quite a lot. I would suggest, if anybody is interested in Pizzagate, that they look at Ben Swan's presentation. Ben Swan, CBS affiliate, channel 48. And then I've got a question. Did you ever look into possible ritual abuse connections with the JonBenet Ramsey case? I looked into the Ramsey case, and I had one source who told me the name of the individual who they felt murdered JonBenet. And although that source did provide me with some correct information, I found that source to be lacking veracity at a certain point. So again, with JonBenet, I'm kind of in a realm of agnosticism, because I don't know. I mean, like Pizzagate, there's some very strange things happening, but I was never able to corroborate what I wanted to corroborate. So I'm back to being an agnostic. And Cullen asked about Cathy O'Brien. What are my thoughts on Cathy O'Brien? My thoughts on Cathy O'Brien are a little mixed. She wrote that book, Transformation of America, with Mark Phillips. And I never really trusted Mark Phillips. And then I was told that Phillips and Cathy O'Brien spent some time with Benassi, Paul Benassi, who claimed to be a monarch victim, who was in the Franklin scandal, picking his brain. So that kind of gave, I mean, I looked at the veracity of Cathy O'Brien, I was very suspect about it. But then I was at a conference, and I was talking to a number of survivors, and one of them had said something negative about Cathy O'Brien, but then a number of them had said that a lot of what she said is true. It's just that her message got tainted by Mark Phillips. So that's kind of where I'm at with Cathy O'Brien. And Mimi asked me about scales for dissociative identity disorder, and there's a number of scales for dissociative identity disorder. And she asked if there were scales that, or scales that made someone susceptible to DID. And I'm not aware of them. I mean, there's scales that show that there's DID. But here's an interesting correlation, though. People that score high on DID scales score very high on hypnosis scales. And they're very susceptible to hypnosis. And that a number of mind control survivors said that hypnosis was integral to their programming. So, and a number of them are, of course, suffer from dissociative identity disorder. So I think that that is really interesting that that people with DID are so susceptible to hypnosis. Now, Brandon asked me about Roger the Dodger. I had Roger Stone on my podcast, and actually, a number of people deleted their accounts because of Roger Stone. And Brandon said instead of a grain of salt, Roger Stone's comments should be taken with a mine of salt. And I agree with Brandon. I know that Roger is not the paragon of veracity. And I know that he's had veracity issues in the past.